This is Audible. From the series and Volume 1 of The Unseen City, Salazar's Touch.
The Bored Stranger by Kevin B. The Bored Stranger. Rays of sunlight streamed into the room through the open windows, nearly blinding Stefan as he opened his eyes. Another day had arrived, bringing with it the same tedious, mundane thoughts he had never imagined entertaining in his younger years. He groaned, attempting to push his heavy body into a sitting position, but his tired muscles betrayed him. 2 more attempts later, he found an alternative, rolling out of the bed he never thought he'd need, until his limbs tangled in the blue sheets and touched the cold wooden floor. Yet another constant reminder of his body's growing weariness. Freeing his legs, he cracked and stretched his aching bones and stiff muscles, the very same he had once ridiculed with such scorn that one might assume the human anatomy had spent centuries as the punchline of cruel jokes, trapped in the body of a 65-year-old man, burdened with persistent aches. Stefan did not feel pain in the usual sense, but the daily effort of maneuvering his deteriorating form had taken its toll. The notion of enduring 15 more years tethered to this mass of blubber made everyday life more of a torturous chore than the colonial duties he had once foolishly accepted. As he prepared for the day, he caught his reflection in the mirror. His hair had turned winter white, his blood-flecked eyes looked weary, and his skin had become chiseled, weather-worn, and nearly leather-like. He kept his facial hair clipped close to his pale skin, a compromise between his hatred for daily shaving and his reluctance to sport a Socratic beard. Stefan viewed the human race and its existence as short, self-imposed, self-righteous, self-centered, and narcissistic. Mere fools chasing individual fame and glory, heedless of the deeper laws governing their world, mere lab rats, just experiments. He reminded himself of this hierarchy whenever he felt the stirrings of sympathy for one of them. Those had been his thoughts 150 years ago when he was first assigned his observatory in Ottawa. The colony's observatories adhered to one crucial criterion. They had to be located in frigid regions where harsh winters spanned at least 6 months of the year. Yet, old Stefan had never been a fan of the cold. He also despised the motivations behind these locations, none more sinister than the fact that the colder the region, the more isolated humans became, making them easier to study and harvest. As he strolled down the hall, time felt irrelevant. Not that he had the option to perceive it otherwise. His bones ached constantly, and the frigid wooden floor only exacerbated the discomfort. He tolerated the pain for now, but he often daydreamed of his next assignment, hoping for a younger suit. His house was small, filled with vintage furniture he had never bothered to change in the years he had lived there. The interior was bare, gray walls, a high white ceiling, devoid of dirt but equally lacking warmth. Moving from one room to another took little time, and he saw no reason to do or acquire more. The stabbing of Cecile, a co-worker he had cherished and adored, had drained him of all desire to continue studying his subjects. His work no longer excited him, and worse still, he had lost all inclination to participate in this year's harvest. Cecile had made it her mission to befriend Stefan when she started working at the shelter. Despite his persistent reluctance to let her in, his rigid walls had crumbled, and he had come to relish her presence. But that had been taken away from him. As an alien assigned to Earth and granted a human body, he was required to report his studies and observations of the human race. More importantly, he was obligated to harvest one human each year for what his superiors vaguely described as an annual sample analysis, ASA, as Stefan had coined it. Harvest season had arrived, but this time the usual flurry of planning was absent. Stefan simply couldn't be bothered. He had grown attached to a human, found beauty in her despite his disdain for human nature. He had fallen in love with Cecile. Just as he had finally resolved to reveal his true identity, at least to prepare her for the idea of his being an alien, she had been brutally and cowardly stabbed and left to die in a bathroom stall at the homeless shelter. Between COVID, lockdowns, his constant double life, and now the profound loss of Cecile, his reluctance to roam the streets in search of an ASA subject no longer troubled him. He pondered the last time Earth had been so steeped in uncertainty and chaos. Memories of apartheid South Africa flashed through his mind, but back then it had been limited to a single country. This time, the entire world seemed to be unraveling, and he was exhausted by it all. Stefan knew he had become more human. He had begun to feel and think like them. It had always been an advantage, making it easier to study his subjects. But now he scoffed at these emotions, indifferent to them. Leaving his house, he wandered through the frigid January streets of downtown Ottawa. He pulled his jacket tighter, muttering a curse as the wind slapped against his skin and his joints throbbed, an ache he had trained himself to perceive over the years. Meat suit or not, he still had to control and carry the damn thing. The pain was a constant reminder of how long he'd been trapped on Earth. Soon he spotted the familiar building where he worked, the homeless shelter on King Edward. The Shepherds of Good Hope, located at 256 King Edward, bore red brick walls stained with dirt and grime, its roof rusted and cluttered with debris. The building was perpetually surrounded by a human fence, homeless individuals loitering, leaning against the walls, sometimes merely passing the time, but often high, unconscious, or immobile. For the moment, the streets were clean. It was still early. A jumbo-sized green bin stood by the roadside, overflowing with trash, waiting for collection. Inside, the shelter buzzed with its usual commotion. It housed society's outcasts, some merely unfortunate, others both unfortunate and criminally inclined. Over the years, Stefan had watched men fall prey to crude, cheaply made drugs, spiraling into addiction. The shelter had become an unpredictable and volatile environment. There was always a fight, a near stabbing, or an outright attack. The incidents were so frequent that the local police had assigned a specialized unit to handle them. The officers knew the usual suspects by name, but still had no clue how the drugs infiltrated the shelter. Humans were easy to predict, Stefan mused, despite their belief in their complexity. Even in such a decrepit place, a hierarchy had naturally formed, one built on fear and violence, and yet it functioned. The most cunning and ruthless always got what they wanted. It was a phenomenon worth studying, worth observing. As expected, the morning brought its first incident. Stefan stood in the doorway to the staff lounge beside Robert, a slick co-worker he secretly disliked and blamed for Cecile's death, though he had no evidence. Blocking the entrance, they watched as two police officers forcefully removed a young woman from the shelter for possessing crack. She kicked and screamed as they escorted her to the waiting cruiser. The spectacle drew stares from the onlookers, yet Stephane's gaze fixated on her blistered lips, bruised eyes, and pallid, clammy skin. She looked frail, though the vigor in her thrashing suggested otherwise. Stephane had never understood the appeal of the white clumps, a filthy drug, usually laced with contaminants, yet they kept using it. It delivered a powerful high, but the aftermath was never worth it. With each use the effects were evident, the physical decline stark, and yet they persisted. That in itself fascinated him. The source of the drugs remained one of the city's best-kept secrets. No one knew where the crack originated. No dealers were ever seen. Yet it was everywhere. Around every corner in the shelter, there was always someone strung out on the verge of an overdose. He watches in silence until the girl and the cops are out of sight. Then his eyes sweep over the room, from the rusty bunk beds with uniform blue sheets lining the walls and center, to the people shuffling about, many with vacant, dead eyes. Anyone who arrived bright-eyed and hopeful never remained that way for long. The decay, the sadness, and the overwhelming sense of resignation clung to the air like a scent of their own, mingling with the usual unpleasant odors of such establishments. Beside Stephane stood Robert, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. He seemed eager to leave, though he secretly relished these moments, being the protective shield for a fellow staff member. Robert was young and fit, quick on his feet, and well-liked. Cheerful and helpful, he had a knack for getting along with everyone. A University of Ottawa graduate and an aspiring police officer, he was a valuable asset to the homeless shelter. One particular incident had burned itself into Stephane's memory, a stark reminder of how volatile the shelter could be. During a routine walkout, a homeless man had shoved a cop aside and stormed into the staff lounge, launching a brutal attack on the general manager, Ms. Bertha Alliston, known to all as Betty. The man had bashed Betty's head against the wall repeatedly before anyone could intervene. It had been his twisted way of making a final statement after she ordered him to be removed. Betty had survived, surprisingly, at 60 years old, but the lesson had been learned the hard way. She later sued the Ottawa Police Department and won. The day after the verdict, a dedicated unit for homeless shelters was established. From then on, every walkout required at least 2 officers. It was a victory that turned little old Betty into a legend at the shelter. No one dared to mess with her again. Today, however, there were no cops, just Robert and old Stephane standing guard. No staff would be attacked on their watch. No one would get hurt. Not again. Not after last week's horror. Cecile, a 22-year-old behavior counselor, had been stabbed multiple times and left for dead in a bathroom stall. She was now in a coma at Civic Hospital, and as expected, no one at the shelter had seen anything. The staff remained on edge, wary of even the most familiar faces. "Oof! That went smoothly, don't you think, Stephane?" Robert patted Stephane on the shoulder as the police officers exited the building. Stephane turned to face Robert and the other staff in the lounge, offering a small, knowing smile. "Tell me about it." "They've been brazen and bold lately." Robert started to walk away, but threw back a teasing remark. "Brazen and bold mean the same thing, old man." Stephane grimaced at the correction, but before he could retort, he caught sight of something. From the corner of his eye, he saw Robert stuffing a bundled plastic bag into his pocket. Then, As if in slow motion, a small Ziploc bag slipped free, tumbling to the floor. Inside were tiny packets of powder and crack clumps. Robert scrambled to retrieve the fallen bag, but Stefan had already pieced it together. The expensive black Mercedes-Benz Robert drove. The rumors of his mansion-like cottage in the East End. The fact that they were all grossly underpaid. And, more chillingly, Cecile's recent speculation about how drugs made their way into the shelter. It all made sense now. Robert was the guy. Stefan's mind clicked into place, forming a plan in mere seconds. "Oh, by the way, Robert," he said casually, "I saw in the office chart that you won this week's raffle, but I left the contributions at home. Want to give me a ride after work? I can hand it to you then." Robert raised a brow. "Sure, man, but you know you can just bring it next shift, right?" Stefan shrugged, feigning indifference. "Yeah, but I'm taking a few days off, including Friday. Figured you'd want it now rather than wait." Then, with a grin, he added, "Or I might just throw it up on eBay by the weekend." Robert chuckled. All right. I'll grab it when I drop you off." The drive to Stefan's house was quiet. As sleek as Robert's black Benz was, the real marvel was how he managed to afford it. Everyone assumed it was family money. But now, Stefan knew better. "That's my place," Stefan pointed. "Pull into the driveway." Robert parked. Stefan hesitated for a moment, lost in thought. This was it. He almost forgot to open the door. "Dude, you okay?" Robert asked. Stefan snapped back and stepped out. "I am not your dude," he thought. "Yeah, I'll be right back." Taking a few steps toward the house, Stefan suddenly stumbled, falling hard to the ground. "Oh, crap!" Robert exclaimed, rushing over. Stefan hid a smile. "Perfect." Robert hurried to help him up. "Man, that sounded bad. You sure you're okay?" Stefan gripped Robert's hand as if struggling to stand, but nearly toppled again. "Don't worry, man. I got you," Robert said, slinging Stefan's arm over his shoulder. "I'll help you inside." Stefan leaned against the wall, wincing. "Thanks. Make yourself at home. I got those snacks we liked at the office. They're in the yellow jar on the counter." He gestured toward the kitchen and started hobbling upstairs. "I'll be right down with your package." "Need a hand?" Robert offered. No, I got it," Stefan replied, disappearing up the stairs. Robert shrugged and walked into the kitchen. He popped open the yellow jar and took a massive bite of the snack before heading back to the living room. The house was not what he expected. It was sparse. No pictures, no decorations, just old but well-placed furniture. It smelled of plywood and fabric softener. Minutes passed. Robert, waiting near the stairs, suddenly realized he couldn't move. A sharp jolt ran through his body, from his toes to the base of his neck. His limbs refused to respond. He tried stepping forward, but his feet were cemented to the floor. He attempted to raise his hand, to call out, but his lips wouldn't move. His tongue felt numb. A strangled, garbled noise escaped his throat. Panic seized him. Where was Stefan? The house wasn't big. Even with an injured ankle, he should have been back by now. Then Stefan emerged, but not as the struggling old man Robert had just helped inside. He walked with purpose, his posture firm, his steps steady. He held nothing in his hands, and his smile, cold, eerie, sent a chill racing up Robert's spine. "I know what you're thinking," Stefan said smoothly, "but you're wrong. It's not a stroke." Robert's eyes widened in terror. "Humans!" Stefan mused. "So predictable." Robert's body twitched, a futile attempt at movement. Stefan watched him with amusement, then nudged him into a chair. "Here," he said, pressing him down with surprising ease. "Let me help you sit." His voice was calm, too calm. Robert knew then he wasn't getting back up. Robert's eyes are the only part of his body that responds. They track Stefan's every movement, filled with dread, betraying the absolute terror coursing through him. Tears slip down his face as he braces for what his mind insists is his imminent demise. "Come on, Robert. I know it's awkward, but I didn't think you'd cry," Stefan quips, dragging an armchair closer to the couch before settling into it. With a subtle, sly smile, he crosses his legs and fixes his gaze on the immobilized young man. "Okay, I know this must be distressing, but since we work together, I owe you an explanation, the least I can do." Stefan rises gently, positioning himself 5 feet away. His expression hardens, becoming eerily still, like a well-sculpted, polished clay statue. With slow, deliberate movements, he unbuttons his shirt, revealing yet again a smooth, clay-like torso devoid of a belly button. Then his abdomen begins to open, creaking like an old cuckoo clock preparing to chime. Robert's tears cease. His wide, unblinking eyes lock onto the grotesque sight unfolding before him. He wants to move, to escape this waking nightmare, but his body refuses. The hollow of Stefan's abdomen reveals a polished brown porcelain interior. Suspended in its center is a black, mercury-like substance, churning violently like a contained storm, connected by a network of glowing veins. Robert watches in silent horror, his bloodshot eyes bulging, every instinct screaming at him to flee. But he remains frozen, his nerves ablaze with terror so overwhelming that he swears he can taste it. He wants to scream, but his lips only quiver, a thin stream of saliva slipping past them. A deep, involuntary exhale escapes his chest, a physical manifestation of the despair that grips him. "There you go." Stefan notes as Robert's body seems to sag ever so slightly. "Isn't that better? Now you can listen properly." Stefan's stomach seals itself shut just as absurdly as it had opened, and Robert's fear of death surges back tenfold. Buttoning his shirt, Stefan pours himself a drink and settles back into the chair, now wearing an expression of utter indifference. He swirls the liquid in his glass before speaking. "You know, this morning I told myself I wouldn't do this anymore. No more of this barbaric routine. I swore off the harvest, decided I'd stop participating in the mission." Leaning forward, he moves within a foot of Robert's rigid face. "You see, son, if I can call you that, I'm not human. I suppose you've figured that out by now." He gestures upward. "We always find it amusing when your kind calls us aliens. Imagine watching your own experiment flourish to the point where it starts calling you the outsider. It's hilarious every time we see that term used in your newspapers and news broadcasts." Stefan chuckles, genuinely entertained by the notion. His grin widens, more wicked than anything Robert has ever seen. The only thing limiting its extent is the inelasticity of his artificial skin. His eyes narrow, his pupils rolling back, giving him the uncanny appearance of a villain straight out of an X-Men movie. Drink in hand, He takes a few unsteady steps, whatever was in his glass clearly having its intended effect. He is animated, almost giddy, but just as quickly his face returns to its earlier deadpan expression. So, let's answer some of the questions swirling in that terrified mind of yours. Just to make this worth my time. Stefan leans back into his chair. Yes, Robert, I am not human. Yes, you cannot move because you ingested a numbing drug not of this world, and yes, we'll get into that later, if time permits. He takes a sip. You see, I've been dying to tell someone this. Almost did last week, in fact, before you had your goons take care of Cecile. I was going to tell her everything about me. He smirks. But here we are, and now I get to share it with you instead. I'll be having a word with those goons of yours and your friend Igor soon enough. Yes, Robert, I went through your phone, and depending on how this conversation goes, we might just be creating a new tradition. Stefan gives a sympathetic smile this time, savoring his drink. Think of it as my yearly therapy session. Sounds like a positive change, right? Though, thanks to you and your phone, I've got enough harvest candidates for the next 3 to 4 years. But I digress. Let me tell you a little story. Pay attention. Snapping his fingers twice toward Robert, he shifts in his seat. Long story short, Earth has been a study subject for thousands of years. It's designated a no-fly zone, meaning a bunch of aliens, as you call us, met and agreed that your planet and species were too interesting to either conquer or interfere with. You see, Robert, nearly every civilization out there is technologically superior to Earth, but they all suffer from the same flaw, the absence of free will. The hive structure dominates all. Everyone is designed for a purpose ingrained in our very being, our cells, our DNA. But one of your own put it best recently. What was his name again? Stefan snaps his fingers, mimicking a human quirk he had studied over the years. Ah, yes, Joe Rogan. I saw a video where he explained it well. He said humans are fascinating. You create weapons that can destroy your entire planet, yet choose not to use them. You engage in bizarre rituals to select a leader every few years. You wage wars, commit murder and atrocities, yet uphold moralistic values. You idolize killers, rappers, actors, and entertainers while ignoring scientists and Nobel Prize winners. He wasn't wrong. And those in charge up there, he gestures upward, agree. Stefan slumps into his chair, watching Robert's pale face, his heart rate erratic. The young man looks like he's lost 10 pounds just from witnessing Stefan's stomach open and close like a bird clock. Strangely, Robert has an urge to touch Stefan's artificial skin, but the cruel reminder of his paralysis halts the thought. Are you following, boy? Stefan asks, though Robert's only response is a vacant stare. So, yes, you are the first human in over a century to whom I've revealed this. It's taboo, against the rules. But given that you're about to go away, who exactly can you tell? That wicked grin returns, stretching his lips unnaturally close to his eyes before vanishing as quickly as it came. A heavy weight drops in Robert's stomach. A cold, hollow realization sinks into his chest like a lead ball. The horror of Stefan's revelation about humanity being an experiment somehow takes a back seat to a more pressing dread. What did he mean by going away? Robert's mind spirals, sweat beads at the nape of his neck, slithering down his spine. This had to be some elaborate prank. Any second now, a camera crew would burst in, shoving microphones in his face, waiting for a relieved reaction. He clings to the hope, prays for it. But reality crushes him as images of Stefan's hollow abdomen flash in his mind. This was no act. It was too intricate, too grotesque. And Robert now knows with sickening certainty that he will die today. Stefan retrieves Robert's phone from his pocket, unlocking it effortlessly using Robert's terrified face. He flips through the photos, his smile widening as he scrolls past images of Robert's secluded house, the neatly packaged drugs. "Where was I?" Stefan muses, snapping his fingers. "Ah, right. I was stationed here in April 1886. It was something new, something exciting. I was one of the select few chosen to observe the high-class rats of the universe. And yes, I said rats, you humans aren't admired out there. One more wrong move from Musk, and Earth will be open season." He leans in. "Trust me, that won't end well for your soft little race. But now on to you, Mr. Robert, with your deceitful self. I know about Cecile. You ordered her stabbing, and you're the reason the shelter is flooded with that drug." At those words, Robert knew there was no escape. Stefan had a reason, not a personal one, but a solid basis, he thought. How did Stefan find out about the drugs? Who or what gave him away? And why did he care about Cecile? "Oh, by the way, so that you know," Stefan said, pulling Robert's phone from his pocket. "I took your phone while we drove here and went through your contacts, messages, emails, and even your image folder. I know it all, Robert. I know you're the piece of shit filling the shelter with drugs. I know about Igor. I've seen the texts. I know he's the main guy, and he'll be dealt with eventually. But today, you win the prize." Stefan leaned back, laughing, his eyes locked onto Robert's, enjoying the moment. Robert had been pulled into the drug world by his childhood friend Igor, a Russian smuggler who, in just 2 years, and thanks to the sudden deaths of some key downtown figures, had climbed to the top of Ottawa's drug empire. Now known as one of the Four Kings, Igor drove a black Range Rover flanked by at least 2 bodyguards, though his sheer presence alone made protection seem excessive. In the bar scene, Igor was infamous as the head crusher. Any fight he got into ended the same way, with him stomping on his opponent's head once they were curled up, defenseless or unconscious. With his newfound power, Igor expanded his empire, owning clubs downtown and keeping close ties with ambitious cops. Robert had known Igor since they were 6, and their bond never wavered. Igor helped Robert find his dream home and even covered half the down payment, calling it a gift. He saw Robert as a brother and kept him from doing the dirty work, letting him operate under the radar at the shelter. After a few visits, Igor was convinced it was the perfect setup. He even increased Robert's cut, persuading him to store barrels of fentanyl on his forested land. That simple act elevated Robert from a low-level dealer, making $5,000 a week, to pocketing $15,000, just for storing the product. With the money, Robert indulged in luxuries he'd never imagined: a BMW, a high-tech cottage mansion, and walls lined with cash. But Cecile got in the way. She learned what she wasn't supposed to and had the audacity to confront him. Eliminating her was simple. He promised a penniless crackhead at the shelter an unlimited fix in exchange for one tiny favor: scare Cecile by stabbing her a few times. Within a day, the addict armed himself with a rusted gutter knife and ambushed Cecile in the bathroom while she made her rounds checking on the people she cared for. He succeeded. But then came the problem, ensuring the crackhead stayed silent. Robert called in a favor from Igor, handing him a photo of the addict. No words were needed. 2 days later, the crackhead was gone. Not in the shelter, not on the streets. He had been killed, chopped up, and fed to Igor's pigs. It was Igor's preferred method of disposal. One of his properties doubled as a pig farm, where he stored questionable merchandise. The land's original owner had long turned a blind eye. Igor paid him well enough to ignore the weekly feedings. Asking questions wasn't worth the risk. Being cooperative was easier than ending up pig food. Robert snapped out of his thoughts as Stefan slowly pulled an X-Acto knife from his back pocket. You see, Robert, I've never let myself connect with humans. I've spent lifetimes observing your kind, from the Second World War to Vietnam, South Africa, Nigeria, the Middle East. You name it. I've seen it all, felt it all, but I never intervened. I lived in solitude, always watching, always disgusted by a species driven by greed and power. Stefan put down his glass and sat beside Robert, his voice eerily calm. Robert's heart pounded, his vision blurring from holding his breath too long. Cecile was different, Robert. She cared. She spent her OSAP funds on food for the shelter. Can you believe that? She didn't even earn a salary, that crazy little girl. Stefan smiled, but it was a sad, distant smile. He toyed with the knife, running his fingers along its edge until it pressed into his skin. Yet nothing bled. She was one of the reasons Earth was deemed worthy of study. And you took her away. She discovered your little operation, and you had her removed. Now, I know you'd love to plead innocence, to beg, but don't bother. The journey has begun, and while you may be an unwilling passenger, the destination is set. Stefan pushed the X-Acto blade forward and carved into Robert's arm with deliberate slowness, his lips curling into a twisted smile. He wasn't doing this for Robert's suffering. He was savoring the moment, feeding his own rage. Robert's eyes leaked tears, red and swollen from pain and terror. The sight thrilled Stefan more than he expected. He slowed the blade, not out of mercy, but to make the moment last. Oh, Robert, I know it hurts, but it's nothing compared to what Cecile felt. And while I'd love to watch you suffer and bleed out, you actually made things easier for me. This year, you are the harvest. Stefan's head dropped as he stared at the blade in his hands, shaking with rage. For centuries, Stefan had adhered to his mission. He was genetically obligated to, but Cecile changed something in him. It wasn't love. He had studied love but never succumbed to it. Yet he had been drawn to her in ways he still didn't understand. He had even been tempted to share secrets of the universe with her, breaking his own rules. And he had slipped. Weeks ago, he had casually told Cecile that Earth had one immortal human, granted eternal life thousands of years ago. How foolish! No one would believe such a thing. Tell people today that Keanu Reeves had always been Charlemagne, and they'd call you insane. But Stefan had wanted Cecile to know. He had wanted to change her life. Until Robert took that future away. The harvest wasn't punishment enough. Stefan wouldn't get to hear Robert's screams once he was taken. But this would become a yearly tradition. He would track the scum of society, dealers like Robert, study them, then use them for the harvest. I can't kill you, Robert, but I've told you things you shouldn't know. Even if you're dissected, I won't risk you repeating what you've seen. My superiors wouldn't approve." Stefan staggered to his feet, the scotch hitting him harder than expected. He braced against a cabinet, its door swinging open. His dazed eyes landed on a small bottle of black pills. A crooked smile spread across his face. He pulled out a pill, bit his tongue to shake off the drunken haze, and swallowed it. Nothing happened, at first. Then his body reset. His muscles firmed, his face smoothed, and his stance straightened. He placed the bottle back, then turned to Robert. Forcing Robert's mouth open, he grabbed his tongue and with one swift motion sliced it off. Blood gushed, painting Robert's chest in thick crimson. Stefan held the severed piece in his hand as Robert's body convulsed. "Don't worry, Robert," Stefan whispered, igniting a lighter. "I won't let you bleed out." He pressed the flame to Robert's wound, sealing the gory mess with the stench of burnt flesh. The harvest was messy, but Stefan had learned from experience. Always cover the furniture. Robert didn't scream. He had already passed out. The fear had won. The pain ruled supreme. Any flicker of hope faded as swiftly as the color of his severed tongue shifted from pale pink to a lifeless blue. "Okay, I think that should do it," Stefan muttered, wiping his hands with a damp cloth before strolling into the kitchen. "It's almost 10 p.m., and your ride will be here any minute, Robert. I appreciate the time we've just shared. I know you think you don't deserve this, but trust me, you're getting off easy. I wanted you to suffer more, but I know they won't make it quick for you. It's nothing personal for them. On the bright side, at least you can go knowing you saved another human life by being this year's harvest." Robert's vision blurred as Stefan spoke. Frozen in place, he sat rigidly, lost in a deep trance. Whether from the pain or something Stefan had done, he couldn't tell. His eyelids drooped, his sight reduced to a hazy sliver, just enough to make out the front door creaking open before two imposing black-clad figures yanked him off the couch. Stefan stood by the door, watching as Robert was loaded into the van. He didn't turn away until a vehicle disappeared down the road. Only then did his gaze fall on Robert's BMW still parked in the driveway, a stark reminder of how unprepared he had been for this year's harvest. Now, he had to get rid of the car without raising suspicion. Later that night, Stefan drove the BMW to Britannia Beach, wiped it clean, and abandoned it with the keys still in the ignition. As he walked away, he scrolled through Robert's phone contacts again. He silently vowed to hunt down anyone connected to Robert's illicit activities, ensuring they became the next harvests in the years to come. The end.
Hope you enjoyed this short story from the Unseen City. Salazar's Touch Volume 1. I took great pleasure in writing these stories, and though riddled in fiction and creativity, I owe the city Ottawa for its inspiration and its disposition.